So, how do American politicians avert going over the fiscal cliff? Joining me now is a man who has spent decades walking the corridors of power here in Washington, D.C. It's Democratic Congressman Martin Frost, who served 26 years in the United States House of Representatives from the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas. Congressman, welcome to the heat.
Thank you.
What's your take on this? I mean, really, the folks in your old district there in Texas probably sit there and say, well, you know what, I've got to balance my checkbook every month. Why can't these guys get things straightened out? What's your general overall take on this?
Well, of course, that's a very good question, and Congress has not behaved itself very well in the last couple of years. I left Congress 8 years ago, and we had a little easier time. It wasn't always perfect, but we usually got to a result. These folks seem to have trouble getting to a final result. But what you have so far, you really have kind of opening negotiating positions by everyone. The president's saying, well, he won the election, and he wants to raise tax rates on the top 2%. The Speaker saying he doesn't want to raise tax rates. He's willing to have some additional revenue, whatever that means, but he wants to keep the tax rate where it is, which is 35% on the highest earners. What happens now after you have these opening statements is they go behind closed doors and they exchange pieces of paper and they see if they can work something out. I assume they will. I also assume it will be right before Christmas, probably December 23rd, before they actually reach an agreement, which is unfortunate, quite frankly, because the longer this drags on, the more you have a chance for special interests on both the right and the left to take out television ads and newspaper ads and kind of beat up on everybody.
Let me ask you about the leadership aspect of this, because you were in the leadership there in the House. You know what it's like when the doors are shut and people sit down. So pull back the veil. Tell us what's going on. What actually happens? Do people start in the center, okay, we can agree to these small things, and then kind of work their way out? How does it work?
Well, generally, and this is true in recent years, it wasn't always the case, but in recent years, it's really been the decisions have been made by the top leaders, by a small group of people in both parties, in both houses. And then they come back and they try and sell that to the rank and file membership. Speaker Boehner has had a hard time in the last couple of years selling what he thought he would agreed to, or what he hoped to agree to with the president on budgetary issues because of the Tea Party element, the far right-wing element in his own party. Conversely, Minority Leader Pelosi, who used to be Speaker, has problems selling some things to the far left in her party. But the way these things usually work is the leaders get together. They may go to the White House. Usually there are exchanges of documents between the leaders and the White House, and the president and the congressional leadership finally reach an agreement. And then you have to actually get the votes, and it's not a foregone conclusion. Now, while this is all going on, the Speaker, I'm sure, has meetings of his entire Republican conference. I was chairman of the Democratic caucus. I presided over the meetings of the Democratic caucus for 4 years. And you give people a chance to stand up and say what they think. You may have some pretty strong views expressed, but ultimately it's the job of the leadership, when all's said and done, to listen to the views of people within their caucus, to try and make as much sense of this as possible, and then go back to the caucus and say, this is not a bad deal, it's not a perfect deal, but you should be for it. And Boehner's had trouble with that, quite frankly, and we'll see how he does this time.
You brought up Boehner, and it gives us an opportunity to throw some clips. President Obama talking about the fiscal clip, and of course the Republican response. Let's listen in.
Sure.
I've got a mandate to help middle-class families and families that are working hard to try to get in the middle class. That's my mandate. That's what the American people said. They said, work really hard to help us. Don't worry about the politics of it. Don't worry about the party interests. Don't worry about the special interests. Just work really hard to see if you can help us get ahead.
We are not going to hurt our economy and make job creation more difficult, which is exactly what that plan would do. It's not the direction that we want to go, because it's going to hurt job creators in America.
Ironically, you just mentioned special interests. He says don't pay any attention to them. The president also says he has a mandate. Does he have a mandate to raise taxes on people making more than $250,000 a year? And are Republicans just being obstructionists?
Well, first of all, the president made it very clear during his campaign that he intended to do this if he were reelected. So it's not like this is something he kept secret. I mean, and he did win the election. And he won the election by a decent margin. He got 332 electoral votes, I think, and he won the popular vote by about 3 million votes. So he did win the election, campaigning on the basis that the very top earners should pay some more in taxes. Now, the Speaker, of course, Speaker's position is that if you do raise the rates on these top earners, that they won't invest, they won't create jobs. But that view was really rejected by the American public. The president won the election. Now, that doesn't mean the president can do anything he wants to, because he has to get something through Congress under our system. The executive branch proposes and Congress disposes one way or the other. Now, the Speaker has shown some degree of flexibility, because he has said, well, there can be some additional revenues. I'm not sure what he means by that. I'm not sure how it plays out, but we can fiddle around with the tax code and do certain things as long as we don't raise the maximum rate, which is now 35, is scheduled to go up to 39.6. It is possible that the compromise on this may be, and we don't know this, they may say, well, instead of the people earning $250,000, let's say people earning $500,000 or people earning $1 million, they get to keep, below those figures, they get to keep the current rates, and people above those figures pay at a higher rate. That's one approach that could be taken.
Some of our viewers don't live here in the United States, so explain to them this pact that Republicans make with Grover Norquist, though, because this seems to be the handcuffs that a lot of these Republican lawmakers have.
Remember, Grover Norquist hasn't been elected to anything. He's a lobbyist, just like other people, and he's put together a group of anti-tax people in the right wing of the Republican Party, and he's gotten Republican candidates for office to sign a pledge saying, if I'm elected, I won't raise taxes. Well, there are now some of the newly elected Republicans, one who refused to sign that pledge. And then there are some others who are saying, well, circumstances have changed. We lost the election. Now we have to go on and try and do some things. I don't think Grover Norquist, as an individual, has any veto power over what Congress does. Sure. But he does have a lot of people that he can mobilize. He can get people to write their congressman, call their congressman. He can probably raise money to put ads on television criticizing Congress. But I don't think he's going to determine this. What's really going to happen here is that the leaders have to decide, do they want to risk, and it's a risk, if you don't reach an agreement by December 31st, do you want to risk the consequences that could have on our economy? Now, it won't have any immediate consequences because it takes a little while for budget cuts to work their way through the system, for tax increases to work their way through the system. Really, the question is what happens to the business climate in the country? Does the stock market react badly? Do business leaders react badly? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about everything falling off a cliff on a certain
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I did hear the head of the NASDAQ saying that this could have a calamitous effect on the U.S. and the stock market, in the sense that the Eurozone's a mess. We just saw France downgraded by Moody's. China's economy slowing. Japan also may be going into recession. And everyone looks to the United States. And this economy is really kind of the engine that keeps things going.
Well, the reason this is the stock market is so important in our country is that so many people now have their retirement funds, or a significant amount of their retirement funds, invested in various mutual funds through what are called 401k plans, so that to the extent the stock market falls, it means you have less money available in your retirement years. Even if you're not ready to retire, it's the fear that the stock market's going to go down and what they will do to your retirement funds. Now, we have Social Security, of course, so Social Security is kind of a floor. You get a certain amount through the Social Security system, but that's not enough for many people to live on in retirement. That keeps you out of poverty, but that's about all it does. And so now more and more people in our country rely on these private investments as a part of their retirement, and the stock market directly affects the value of those private investments. So people get very upset if they think their retirement funds are going to be jeopardized.
Let's listen to the president again as he talked about this pivotal issue that we've been chatting about during the campaign, once again touching on it again recently at the White House. Let's listen.
When it comes to the top 2%, what I'm not going to do is to extend further a tax cut for folks who don't need it, which would cost close to $1 trillion. As we've already heard from some Republican commentators, a modest tax increase on the wealthy is not going to break their backs. They'll still be wealthy.
2 years ago, he said the same thing. He caved. This time around, do you think he's got the resolve to take on the Republicans?
Well, first of all, 2 years ago, he had to be concerned about his own reelection. and the consequences that might have. We, of course, have term limits. The president can only serve 2 4-year terms. He can't run again for president, and so he doesn't have to be worried about the next election. I do think, though, that he wants a result. He doesn't want us to go to December 31st without a result because of the effect, the psychological effect that could have on our economy. So even though he says, no, 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 we're not going to give an inch on rates, he may wind up giving an inch or two on the rate issue.
Isn't there some middle ground where everyone can come together for the betterment of the country? Because these deficits, they do eat away at the core of what the United States is all about. And it's a bill, a legacy you're handing on to your children and grandchildren.
Well, there should be. And here's the biggest problem. It's not the tax side. I mean, you can figure out the tax side. The problem is the entitlement side, the spending side, because that's such a big part of our budget, Social Security and Medicare. Now, there are groups within the Democratic Party who take the position, don't touch a hair on the head of those entitlements. Don't do anything that affects senior citizens. The question is Congress willing, along with the president, to say, well, maybe we can make a change in the Medicare system, not do away with it, not go to a voucher system the way Republicans have suggested, but maybe raise the eligibility age from 65 to 66 or something like that.
Martin Frost, thanks so much for stopping by.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thank you.